and just talk. And so Mr. Craig was passing off his sort of philosophy of theater to Harvey. Craig was 81 and Harvey was 18. One of his pieces of advice was, go attach yourself to a theater company, and if after 5 years it's not doing anything for you, move on. So it's sort of like this idea that you continually move through things. Let's see, what else can I tell you? After Harvey was in Europe for a number of years, he came back to the United States and started a theater company up in New Hampshire. And basically they did productions that were not necessarily theater, but they would make their own theater, doing shows based on legends and myths. Then ultimately he moved back to Europe and was in Belgium and continues to live officially in Belgium, and started an arts institute, a theater institute there that is about working with children, using theater for children to learn as well as having children do theater. So it's really this amazing opportunity for you guys, I think, to hear about Edward Gordon Craig from a person who actually intersected with Mr. Craig. As I noted in last class, the end of the 19th century, from the standpoint of how theater was being done, was hyper-realistic. That it wasn't just good enough. I mean, I talked a little bit about putting the illusion of reality on stage, and then people took it even further and had to put the real stuff on stage. And it's into that world that Edward Gordon Craig and another fellow by the name of Adolf Appia sort of came back at it and said, let's pull away from all of this realistic stuff and let's look at it from a more expressionistic, artistic, and abstract way of telling the stories. And so, Harvey, are you ready?
Ready.
I'm going to pass this over to Harvey. We'll do about an hour. Harvey will talk for about an hour, and then there'll be some time for questions if you have any at the end. So I appreciate everybody turning off computers and stuff. None of this is going to be on the test, so this is all about just having, I hope, a great experience. So, Harvey, it's yours.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm happy to be here with all of you today. The radicalism of Gordon Craig's position is so far going that it has yet to be fully acknowledged and even absorbed by the theatre. From the start, he felt torn between the theatre into which he was born, the son of a famous Victorian actress, Ellen Terry, and art as exemplified by music, painting, sculpture, and architecture. His father had been an architect, Edward William Godwin. These arts inspired him to the idea that, like each of them, the theatre should come to speak a language of its own, as sound does in music, and space through architecture. But the theatre language should be an as yet unknown language, yet open as space and sound are to human receptivity. Then will the theatre become an art and stop being an auxiliary to other arts. He stated to the world and to himself likewise, quote, "If you can find in nature a new material, one which has never yet been used by man to give form to his thoughts, then you can say you are on the high road towards creating a new art." This was his idea, so that it is a paradox and out of place, we could say, that he's known as a designer of stage scenery, because he began by clearing the stage of scenery and leaving in its place actors, harking back to the theater's origin when there was no scenery, a lost origin even before Greece, and on the other hand, laying a groundwork for modern mime. This linking of past and future, almost as though ignoring the present, is characteristic of Craig. Yet the theatre of our time considers itself strongly influenced by his ideas. One of the reasons that his name is associated with scenery is because he drew so many pictures. Here is one of them. But you'll notice that there's really not very much happening scenically in terms of any constructions or effects. Rather, the figure, who you can just about make out, you could say stage left or to your right, is evoking a stage larger than an ordinary stage. And this sense of evocation, which was literally unknown in the theater, was very much his premise, his beginning. He felt that an actor, by his presence and movement, could evoke a stage vaster than a modern stage. Our understanding of his idea becomes clearer when we realize that his work consists of two main lines, not one. One of these lines is his work as a stage director. While he himself had been a very, very talented actor and heir, you might say, to a tradition of acting on his mother's side of the family, his first pronouncement after having directed several productions was that the acting we know is not an art, but a craft within theatre work. And the theatre work consists, quote, of action, which is the very spirit of acting, scene, which is line and color, rhythm, which is the very essence of dance. It is this pronouncement and the evolution of the director in particular that are related in his statement. But the theatre has yet to respond, even today, to his research. And it is this research which constitutes the second line of his work. This line breaks from the theatre and its traditions, from its plays, serious or comic, from operas and musical comedies, in order to make a differentiation between these forms which constitute the theatre we already know, and that new entity which does not yet exist, which he called the art of the theatre. It has yet to be created, or at least rediscovered, for its impulse, its inspiration, its laws, we could say, must have preceded and even impelled the ancient birth of the theatre. Probably in Egypt, according to his calculation, certainly before Greece. But there, in Egypt, let's say, the community participated in a ceremony, in a place, before there was any distinction even between actor and spectator. From these laws, the succeeding history of the theatre had wandered away. And to find out these laws, Craig proposes that students and co-workers join him in a search. And the succeeding history of the theatre should be almost ignored to give way to this search. The aim is not to imitate some imaginary primeval past, but to induce the law's preparation and discovery of by creating a whole new society, which includes actors and spectators. In this sense, there is a social note in his art of the theatre. This new art would cease to be a meeting ground for the arts, such as writing, music, painting. These arts, he said, do not need the theatre for their existence, and the art of the theatre, in turn, will not require them, but will proceed from an unknown dynamic of its own. We have to remember that this strange idea is coming not from an aesthetician or philosopher, but from an actor. When I met Craig and became his pupil in Vence, in the south of France, he was more than 80 years of age, but he had not forgotten that when he was 18, in 1890, he was already an actor in the foremost company of London at that time, Henry Irving's company. And Sir Henry Irving's acting style in Shakespeare and modern plays was an extremely corporal one, a bodily one, as opposed to the predominantly verbal acting of the time. This made a permanent impression on Craig, so much so that when over half a century later, in 1945, Craig saw a mime performance by the father of modern mime, Etienne Decroux. I'll just interject because I don't know how many of you know the name of Decroux. You may know the names of his pupils, Marcel Marceau and Jean-Louis Barrault. Maybe those names have reached your ears. But Decroux made a trip to New York once, and where did he come to introduce his theories and even practice of mime? Here, NYU. He was here. It's something which is probably on file. You'd have to look it up. Here is Decroux. That's certainly him. Very, very much him.